repairing and identifying our Namur mount solenoids. Our most common is a three-way and a four-way solenoid. These are only Namur mount, meaning that they only bolt to an actuator. In particular, rack and pinion pneumatic actuator, and the bolt pattern matches up to this bolt pattern right here, which is a Namur mount bolt pattern. I laid out some of the most common options, which would be a conduit and a DIN connection, and a three-way and a four-way. The three-way can only be used as single acting. The four-way can be used as double acting or single acting. These are single solenoid air assist spring return. Today we are going to disassemble and repair and identify the repair kits that are available to you. Whenever you're working on the solenoids, you first remove the coil, and to identify that it is in fact the solenoid that is not working, when it is still plumbed up, you have a manual override right here. This bypasses your electrical signal of your coil and mechanically shifts the valve. If your valve is leaking air, not shifting, or any of the above, the best thing to do is to repair the unit. This manual override, you can press the button to shift the spool, or you can shift the spool and turn the button, which it has a small screwdriver slot as well. But if you can simply do it with your hands, and that will lock it in the opposite position, the default position, and then you can lock it into the other position. The tools you're going to need today are going to be some simple screwdrivers, an Allen key, and maybe an O-ring puller. The first thing you want to do is remove your coils from the armature tubes. This is your armature tube, and this is your button assembly, and this is the body, end cap. First thing we do is remove the armature tube and button assembly. This will expose your spool, which your spool has NBR Rabuna O-rings and a spring on one end. It also has two O-rings on the mating surface where it meets the actuator. These are all provided to you in a kit, which is labeled N4S-RK. This can be purchased through your local distributor. And what comes in it is a new spring, a new spool with O-rings, a piston, two Buna O-rings for the mating surface, and a Buna O-ring for the end cap or plate, and I can't pick it up. All right, let's get into it. So we'll remove the cap, and it is key that you pay attention to, this is a date code. This is our manufacturing date code that lets us know when we manufactured it and what lot. But it's important that you pay attention to where the placement of this date code is. You can assemble it backwards, but then everything will work in reverse. which is sometimes desirable. Once you remove the screws, you'll see you have an O-ring inside there that's diamond shaped. This is to get around the air passage holes, and this is the air assist part of the solenoid. So the air actually assists the spring to move it back into the default position. I strongly urge against using power tools. This is not meant for a drill. These screws will strip out very easily. Now we have an empty body, and we can remove our old O-rings. This is where my O-ring puller comes in handy. If this had been in service, this is when I would want to take it to a parts washer and clean the inside of the unit. But since this is a brand new unit, it's pretty clean, so we can move on. So once you have removed all the old O-rings, and your old spool and your old spring, then we replace our new O-ring. If I can pick it up. This O-ring, very difficult to see, but it has a flat side, and then on the other side it's rounded. You're going to want the flat side down into the machined groove of the plate. It does not hurt to lubricate this, and if you're going to lubricate it, I choose to use a high temp axle grease that's good for Viton and Buna. I find that it works well in most pneumatic circuits. Instead of using a lithium grease, which I find doesn't do so well with condensation and in cold temperatures. The next step is to replace your spool. Put your spring inside the cavity machined for the spring and in the spool, and pass the spool through the valve. Now, paying attention to our date code, we want the spring side to be on the date code side. Then we replace the plate. Critical to replacing the plate, you have two threaded holes, and then you have a non-threaded hole. That's an air passage for the air assist. And we want this triangular part to go around the air passage hole. Get that where you see it. And then you also have a pin inside here which goes inside the spring to keep it from moving around. I find that it's easier to do this side so you're not fighting the spring while you're replacing the plate. Not like that. It's only necessary to tighten until snug. Then you can see the spool is protruding out of the top of the body of the valve. And we have our button assembly. Most of the time, the N4S-RK is all that's necessary. You do not. We also have a 4V310-P, which replaces the whole front end of the valve. The only time that's necessary is if you damage the armature tube, or another common thing is you damage the manual override button. A lot of people use screwdrivers on them and break the plastic. But first we'll start with just replacing and identifying the piston and the parts. So if you pull this apart, the piston comes out. This comes in your N4S-RK repair kit. You can just simply replace this piston and push it back down in. Your spool or armature tube has three major parts to it. The outside part of the armature tube, the spring, and the inside part of the armature tube. So we've replaced the piston and we've checked the integrity of the armature tube. This assembly is back together. When you go to replace the button assembly, the same as the other side, we have an air passage hole and two threaded holes. This has a small O-ring for the air passage hole. We need to make sure that that meets up with the untapped air passage hole. Once you've replaced that, you can tighten down your screws. And now you have a refurbished and repaired Namur mount solenoid. I suggest that you always test the mechanical part of the solenoid before you put the coil back on. It just to make sure that you know the mechanical end works before you start troubleshooting the electrical side. Process of elimination. An easy way to do that is to just bolt it to your actuator. This can be orientated either way. If you flip it 180 degrees and bolt it down, it will work exactly the same, just in reverse. So depending on your application and whether you want the valve to open when you send the signal or close when you send the signal. Let's talk about, you have three threaded 1/4-inch ports here. You have EA, P, and EB. P for pressure, meaning this is where you bring in your pneumatic pressure. It needs to be in between 60 and 140 psi. Ideally, everything we size is off of 80 psi. The EA and EB is just exhaust ports for each side of the cylinder. I suggest that you put a speed control muffler, our part number SCM-2, or a breather vent or muffler. The speed control, what you gain by doing that is you can actually speed up or slow down the how fast the actuator moves. And if you want it to move as fast as it possibly can and you're not concerned with controlling the speed, then put a breather vent in there. Because you also, when you actuate this, one side exhausts and the other side actually brings in atmospheric air. So if you put a breather vent or a speed control on there, it'll keep you from sucking in trash and having to repair the Namur valve more often. For the last part of the test, we bring air into the P port and see if we can get it to action. I'm using the manual override button to mechanically shift the valve. I now know that this valve is mechanically sound, and then we can reattach our electrical connection, whether that be DIN or conduit. Most important thing to remember when you are attaching your coil is that this is hand tighten only. Do not use a wrench. It will pull the armature tube out of the button assembly, and then you will have to buy a 4V310-P. Now we have a fully repaired Namur mount cylinder.